Okay. So we're going to be reading chapters 1 and 2. I hope at least, I hope some of you got a chance to at least glance at that. So I've got a copy pulled up. I don't know if anyone else does. We can just take turns reading. Oh, before we start, when we study the Law of One and Confederation sources in general, they always offer the caveat of just receive what's good medicine for you. Just take what feels right to you and leave the rest behind. And so I'm going to make that caveat because Walter Russell does not when he's teaching and writing. I really just encourage everyone to just listen for what resonates for you, and anything that feels off or doesn't land, just leave it behind. Okay. Any questions before we get into it? Comments, needs? Okay. Anybody want to start?
I'll start. Can you hear me all right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The Secret of Light, Walter Russell, Chapter 1. Chapter 1, the eternal question. Who am I? What am I? Why am I? Whither am I bound? What is my relation to the universe, to man, and to God? What is truth? How am I to know truth? Whence come my power? What is the source of my power? How am I to find balance? In my dealings with my fellow man, how am I to know that balance in our interchange, which will enrich both him and me? Countless are the religious teachings, and many are the commandments to goodness, but goodness is still veiled from my eyes like a thick mist which hides thy light, which I vainly seek. I stumble in its darkness, unbalanced I fall. O thou unseen one, tear from my eyes the blinding veil which hides the path to thy light, that I might find my way to thee. That is the cry of the ages. I'm going to stop there. I absolutely love that.
Let's go ahead and read through till the voice within. So just a little over more pages. Someone else want to pick up? Or just...
That is the unanswered question which is arising from the heart of this awakening generation. Civilization progresses in cycles. New comprehension periodically transforms mankind into higher beings. A new cycle of 3,000 years duration is now in its birth throes. God's omniscience, omnipotence, and omnipresence are centered in the consciousness of every man, but few there are who know of the oneness of their self-soul with the universal self-soul. Man requires many millennia to begin to be aware of that. Each cycle of man brings him nearer to his awareness of his oneness with the light of his self-source. Man lives in a bewildering, complex world of effect, of which he knows not the cause. Because of its seemingly infinite multiplicity and complexity, he fails to vision the simple underlying principle of balance in all things. He therefore complexes truth until its many angles, sides, and facets have lost balance with each other and with him. Truth is simple. Balance is simple. Rhythmic, balanced interchange between all pairs of opposite expressions in natural phenomena and in human relations is the consummate art of God's universe of light. It is also the law. In this one fundamental universal law lies the balanced continuity of all creative expression in God's electric wave universe of two conditioned lights in seeming motion, which record God's one whole idea of creation into countless seemingly separate parts of that whole idea.
Thank you. So I don't know who was tracking the thread, but I know BJ read this part and said something about it on the Telegram thread, because last week, or in the Law of One study group, we were talking about the original thought. And Rod talks about the original thought. And then here is Walter Russell talking about God's one whole idea of creation. And BJ and I both have the same experience of, they're talking about the same thing. It's the same thing. The original thought and God's one whole idea of creation map, I think, exactly onto each other. So that's interesting. May, did you want to say what you enjoyed about that first part?
I can't, but I also have a question.
Mhm.
But I'll say what I just love the poetry of it. It is like my North Node, just completely. My North Node is in Aries, and apparently I'm also a yellow warrior in galactic something. I just got in another thing. I don't know what that's called. It's a galactic calendar of 13 moons. So I'm a yellow warrior, and that makes me think of you, Natalie, and your what I learned through you and your work. So anyway, but I just love that this is, yeah, it's just the poetry is just gorgeous, and finding the balance. I think that's what I'm really wanting to find. And we stumble in our darkness, and then we fall unbalanced. And then, how do we find the balance? And Ra talks about that all day long. So I love that. I was wondering if someone could illuminate me. I did not finish reading the stuff from last week, the 38 pages. I started it, but I forgot about it. And it says at the bottom of page 2 about the continuity of all creative expression in God's electric wave universe of two conditioned lights in seeming motion. And this seems to be a theme here. And I was wondering if someone could talk about the two conditioned lights and what that is.
I could take a pass at sharing my perspective on that. We're gonna dive in so deeply, and then that's the whole thing. The two conditioned lights, God's sexed electric universe, the reality that we exist in, physical reality, is created by two conditioned lights that are always in balance. It's duality. It's duality theory, yin yang. I mean, I really do think that you know what's going on there intuitively, and we're going to dive deeply into that. That's the central theme of Russell's teaching is how that works, how the two conditioned lights create reality.
Cool.
Yeah. Did any of you resonate with any of those questions? Have you asked those questions to yourself? Who am I? What am I? Why am I? Where am I going? What's my relationship to universe, to man, to God?
I tend to ask more about truth. I am a truth seeker, and I believe all of us are. So, yeah. I also really resonated with countless are the religious teachings about being good. And, that's like the fly in the ointment there, because you can be as good as you want, and then you're still told you're going to hell. So what the hell's the difference? What's the point? in my religious background, that was the thing. So anyway, I'm going to let someone else talk. I'm tired of talking.
This question, how am I to know what balance in our interchange will enrich the other and myself, is alive for me right now. It often is. It's kind of the work that I have to do over and over again, but yep, it's up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a really, he ended up being invited to come and talk to businesses, and he wrote a book about business. And he has a whole take on reciprocity, essentially. He doesn't call it reciprocity, but it's a really interesting part of his work, is talking about how balance shows up in our relationships and in our interchange with, our exchanges with other people and our business. And yeah, it's central to his teachings as well. Okay, well, let's keep going, and y'all can, if anyone feels like they have something to say, we can just, I think we'll just try to chunk it through. It's broken up into these little sections, and we'll try to read one by one and then stop. And if anyone wants to say anything, they can. Does anyone want to read from the voice within? Hi, Diana.
Hi, I'm happy to read, but I just have to find my place because I just got myself seated. I'm so sorry to be late. So,
No, I'm so glad you showed up. It's page 3.
oh, okay. Yeah, I'm really happy to be here. The voice within. The great unanswered question of man has a simple answer. The silent voice within every man is ceaselessly whispering it to his awakening consciousness. Every desire written upon the heart of man is carried to the source, and its answer will come. But few there are who ask comprehensively, and fewer still who hear. Many are the ages of preparation for worthiness to hear it. For man's consciousness is insulated from his source by the sensations of his electrically conditioned body, which he wrongly thinks of as being his mind and his personal self. What he calls his objective human mind is but the seat of electric sensations of his body. What he mistakes for thinking is but an electric awareness of things sensed and recorded within the cells of his brain for repetitive usage through what is termed memories. Memories have no more relation to knowledge of universal mind, which is in man, than Victrola records are related to the source of their recordings. What he thinks of as his living body is but an electrically motivated machine, which simulates life through motion, extended to it from its centering self-soul, which alone lives and wills the body to move. Where should I stop? Should I keep going?
If you don't mind going, well, I was thinking we would read all the way until the next section,
Sure.
but it is a couple pages, but it's, yeah.
My fan is on my stove. I'm going to turn it off really quick. Sorry. Little discombobulated tonight. What he calls his subjective mind is his consciousness, his spiritual storehouse of all knowledge, all power, and all presence. That consciousness is his self, his eternal self, through which his omniscience, omnipresence, and omnipotence are expressed as he slowly becomes aware of their presence within him. The electrically oscillating nerve wires which operate his bodily mechanism act almost entirely through automatic reflexes and instinctive control, and to a very little extent through mental decisions. Each cell and organ of his body has an electrical awareness of its purpose, and each fulfills that purpose without any mental action whatsoever upon the part of the intelligence which occupies that body. The heartbeat, for example, is purely automatic. The white corpuscles of the blood rush to repair an injury to the body as automatically as a bell rings when a button is pushed. In this body and its electric recording brain, man thinks that he thinks and lives, loves and dies. He thinks himself conscious while awake and unconscious while sleeping, unaware that in all nature there is no such condition as unconsciousness when sensation ceases in sleep. Man does not say that his tooth is unconscious when it is put to sleep by short-circuiting the electric current in the nerve wire, which gives sensed electrical awareness to his tooth. He knows that his tooth cannot be conscious, but he does not know that his body cannot be conscious. Nor does he yet know that consciousness never sleeps, never changes, for consciousness in man is his immortality. It is the light which he is unknowingly seeking, but assumes that the sensation of his brain is his thinking. Man is still new. He is barely out of the dark of his jungle. For the 1,000,000 or more years of his unfolding, he has relied upon sensation for his actions and the evidence of his senses for his knowing. He has been aware of the spirit in him only a very few thousands of years. In this beginning of his new awareness, he is confused, knowing not which is mind in him, which is consciousness in him, and which is sensation. He has not yet learned that bodies are but self-created mechanisms which manifest their centering self, and that self manifests God as one with it. Likewise, he has not yet learned that bodies neither live nor die, but repeat themselves continuously and forever, as all idea of mind likewise repeats itself. The wheel, for example, is a mechanism consisting of a hub, spokes, and a rim. A little part of the wheel touches the ground, feels it, then leaves it, to disappear from reach of the sensations which connect rim, spokes, and ground. But then it reappears. When that happens to man, we say he was born, lived, and died. When it happens to the apple, the flame, or the tree, we say the apple was eaten, the flame has gone out, and the tree has decayed. We say that because only a small part of the cycle of any idea comes within the range of our senses. The larger part of the cycle is beyond our range of perception, just as the larger part of the wheel is beyond the sensed perception of the ground. We do not yet know that the invisible part of the cycles of all idea is as continuous as the wheel is continuous. The cycle of the apple is light, reaching from the sun and earth to that positive half of the apple cycle, which we hold in our hand. The negative half of the cycle is light returning to sun and earth for repetition as another manifestation of the eternal idea of the apple. The same is true of the flame, the tree, or any other part of the one whole idea of creation. The flame goes out to our sensing, but it still is. Likewise, the tree, the forest, mountain, planet, and nebula of the far heavens appear, disappear, and as surely reappear. Likewise, man appears to disappear and reappear again and again in countless cycles to express eternal life of the spirit in eternal repetitions of that part of the man cycle, which the body of man can sense. Man never dies. He is as continuous as eternity is continuous. Jesus rightly said that man shall not see death, for there is no death to see or to know. Likewise, the body of man does not live, and having never lived, it cannot die. The spirit alone lives. The body but manifests the spirit. That which we think of as life in the spirit of man manifests itself by willing the body to act. Actions thus made by the body under the command of its centering soul have no motivative power or intelligence in themselves. They are but machines motivated by an omniscient and omnipotent intelligence extended to them. These things we do not yet know, for man is in his infancy. He is but beginning to know the light.
Thank you for reading so much. Any comments on any of that? Mm-hmm.
I just have one highlighted. Every desire written upon the heart of man is carried to the source, and its answer will come. but few there are who ask comprehensively, and fewer still who hear. The asking comprehensively, that's something that gets me because I feel like I haven't honed my desire in the direction of my seeking in a way that maximizes what I might get back. Like, you know, in the raw contact, how the specificity of Dawn's questions are what caused Ra to be able to offer as much as they did. It seems like in everything that I've studied that we have to seek with such desire and like poignant, like desire for a certain clarity in some area. And I'm always questioning how to focus my seeking. Just sharing that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it also reminds me of how Ra talks about how humanity's capacity for focus is quite undeveloped. Like, you know, like the way that, you know, I don't remember if they were talking about meditation or what, but they were, and I don't remember the quote, but they seem to suggest that the capacity to focus and meditate and bring one's awareness to their desired, you know, to put it on what they desire and keep it there is not very developed. And I think that's related. I think that the asking, you know, to the writing it upon the heart and asking the source, the true source of ourselves, what it is that we desire, it also requires a kind of a focus. I think in my own life, like I just am constantly jumping from one desire to the next. And I think that there's a way that doesn't allow the fullness of the power that's available in the asking and the receiving to manifest.
Yeah, I think it has something to do with honing one's will.
Yeah, I agree. So remember, this was written in 1947. So, you know, a lot has developed, I think, in the collective mind of humanity between then and now. And I think there's more, like specifically, I think there's more fertile understanding of the differentiation of the body and the self. You know, there's been more kind of teachers come out about that. There's been more people who've had that revelation. But he really just drives it home. You know, he really drives home the pointing out the confusion of what we tend to identify ourselves as in distinction with what we actually are. And, you know, he keeps saying that in lots of different ways.
I like the apple analogy about the positive half of the apple when it's growing, when it's absorbing the sun, and the negative half where it's either being consumed or decayed. Doesn't really tell exactly what. Just the kind of the cycle, the natural cycle of things. Calling it positive and negative was interesting to me.
Yep.
I really like the sentence that says, there are those who seek the light who are discouraged because they seemingly cannot find it, wholly unaware that they have forever been finding it. I think that's awesome.
Yeah. It's such a paradox. I mean, we look through it. We're looking through it all the time. We look through ourself all the time. We look through God all the time. It's like it's what we are. It's what we, but we don't notice it because it's so present. It's so fundamentally in how we, how we are aware. Yeah.
So about the positive half of the apple cycle and the negative half, it sounds to me like he's talking about the positive half being the manifested part of the cycle and the negative half being the unmanifest part of the cycle. So it's not in the same sense that Ra talks about.
Well,
When Ra-
one of the ways he talks about it is folding and unfolding.
Okay.
So like the positive half is like folding. It's the folding of light into form. And then unfolding is the kind of the unwinding of the form back into stillness, back into the void.
Right.
Yeah. And already there in that example, there's kind of the seed of the layering of, or the complexing of ideas, because an apple is made up of smaller units of coherent parts. And those are part of the idea too. Each of the cells of the apple is its own idea of apple cell. And then the photons that make up the cell, all of those are ideas. And so there's this nesting of ideas, portions of the one infinite idea, the one original thought. And they nest, and they each have their cycles. They each have their in-breath and out-breath. They each have their rhythms. And he just is focusing on the apple. But even the apple, comes and goes at a faster pace than the tree does, the apple tree, right? The apple is coming and going, breathing in, breathing out, breathing in, breathing out, as the tree is, persisting while it's going through those cycles. And then the tree itself has a forming and an unforming portion. Anyway, I don't know if that's making sense, but there's all these nested complexities of ideas that come into form and go out of form.
Sounds like you are describing a fractal.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of, yeah.
That's what it all is.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, does somebody care to read the next portion? Be ye forever transformed. 2.5 pages.
I can do that.
Great, thank you.
Be ye forever transformed. Man is forever seeking the light to guide him on that long, tortuous road, which leads from his body's jungle to the mountaintop of his awakening soul. Man is forever finding that light and is being forever transformed as he finds it. And as he finds it, he gradually finds the self, which is the light. And as he becomes more and more transformed by the godlight of the awakening self within him, he leaves the jungle farther below him in the dark. There are those who seek the light, who are discouraged because they seemingly cannot find it, wholly unaware that they have forever been finding it. Unknowing ones expect to find it all at once in some blinding flash of all power, all knowledge, and all presence. It does not come that way until one is nearing his mountaintop. Man cannot bear much of the light at a time while his body is still new and too near its jungle. All who are well out of the jungle have already found enough of the light to illume their way out of its dark depths. He who is far out of the jungle and still seeks the light in the high heavens is forever finding it and is forever being transformed as he finds it. One cannot for one moment remove his seeking eyes from his high heaven. For ever so slight a glimpse below into the dark brings him back to the fears of the dark, which tempt him to plunge back into them. Look ye, therefore, forever upward into the high heavens of inspiration, where glory awaits the fearless, all-knowing seeker of beauty in the purity of the universal light. To him whose eyes are in the high heavens, the light will forever come, and he will be forever transformed as he finds it. The dark road from his jungle to his mountain top of glory becomes ever more illumined during the ascent from body to spirit. It is hard but glorious. It is a hard but glorious road to climb. All must make the climb. The ascent of man from the dark to the light is the forever repetitive play of man on the planets of suns. When all mankind has found the light, the play will be finished. Likewise, this planet will be finished as an abode for man. It will then be rolled off into its ever-expanding orbit, while Venus is gradually being rolled into place to become the stage for the next repetition of the ascent of man in this solar system. We actors of the play must therefore be content with the lines of the play revealed to each of us in light. We must likewise be ever joyous at our continuous transformation, as each one of us learns our part line by line, the better to fulfill it worthily. All parts of the play are experiences which become the action of the play. All man's experiences are part of his unfolding. Each experience is a part of his journey from dark to the light. All experiences are steps in that journey to his mountaintop of glory. All experiences, therefore, are good experiences. There is naught but good. There is no evil. There is naught but life. There is no death.
Thank
Do we
you.
read? Do we read the ones in the boxes on the next 2 pages?
Well, let's pause there and see if anyone has any reflections on that. I know I do, but I'll wait.
I actually was reminded of the conversation that we were having on Telegram earlier, and I pulled up the part that I think it was the original, I think was Diana, when we were discussing exploring the Satanism stuff. And she said, at which point in our lives do we say, I'm not giving the floor to this entity / energy that seeks to energize the distortions and lure me to their path. And that, I thought of that during the beginning of the reading when he says, oh, I lost it. I don't have the material. I don't have the book yet. It's on my phone and I just don't want to toggle and look for it because I'll just be like quiet. But there was a part in the beginning of Kent's reading that reminded me of that. And I can't, and it just slipped my mind as soon as I tried to say it. So I'm sorry, but there it is for whatever it's worth.
That's totally understandable, but I bet it was what May said. Maybe there are those who seek the light who are discouraged because they seemingly cannot find it, wholly unaware that they have forever been finding it. Was it that? Or no?
No, it was after that. It was the part where he's talking about turning away and looking to the darkness.
Right. That's what I thought you were talking about. One cannot for one moment remove his seeking eyes from his high heaven. For ever so slight a glimpse below into the dark brings him back to the fears of the dark, which tempt him to plunge back into them.
Yes, that's exactly what's the statement.
Yeah. It's interesting that part of the reading and a couple of other parts I find I have a little bit of pushback to, because there is this there's a lot of wisdom in having a willingness to look at the darkness, that's shadow work. When we get too focused on like only look at the light, it's a little tricky. There's some traps there. And I'm preaching to the choir here. You all know that, but that one raised my hackles a little bit.
Well, and then later on in the text that Kent just read, he's talking about how there is no evil. And so I'm trying in my mind to understand, to make sense of those two statements of, you know, if there is no evil and no darkness, then what darkness are we looking at?
Mm-hmm. So the comment that I wanted to make was, I think the metaphor he uses of the jungle and the mountaintop, I translate that to be working in the lower triad, the lower three chakras, and working in the upper three chakras. I think the jungle of man is when we're like, we haven't really, you know, it's the first half of third density, you know, 3.1 through 3.3, when we're working out the sort of, you know, the how to be a person and how to be balanced in your, you know, in your personhood. And you know, it's a lot about ego, basically. You know, it's a lot about the body's needs and how to balance the personal self. And I think that the mountaintop experiences he's talking about are once we move up into the higher chakras, you know, once we've gained balance in the lower triad and are able to like work, you know, in the transpersonal realm and know that we're connected to the universe and know that we're connected to, you know, something larger than ourselves, and be seeking that actively. So I think, you know, and through that lens, if you read what he writes through that lens, then turning back to look at the darkness, look back into the jungle, is more about like, you know, getting caught up in the personal, you know, there's a danger getting caught up in like the personal desires rather than the co-created desires that are our desires, but also when we're working with the deeper part of ourselves. Maybe that's just one way to look at it. Diana? And then Steph.
I also think it has to do with the just stepping back into the unknowing, almost like losing faith in the revelation that you've experienced. So you see something that's true, and then you begin to doubt it. And the author himself talked about this weird experience in that PDF where he had a near-death experience or died, I don't know which, when he was really sick, and came back, and everybody was in such tremendous disbelief that he could have just done such a 180 that they put doubt in this little boy's mind that he could actually be alive. And he said that he entered a state of paralysis for like 30 days or something because he had realized that he could bring himself back by choice. And then people were like, no, that can't possibly be. And he went bye-bye again. So when he talks about the darkness, I don't think it's a polarized darkness, but more of a headed back into the confusion, which is a lot like what Aaron is saying, I think.
Yeah. Makes sense.
That's a good point.
That clarified it a lot for me, both of you.
What you got, Steph?
Be a little patient with me today. I'm a little fragmented myself. So I would say, I think someone was asking a question about like listening. It could have been you, Diana. Sorry. I think it was you that was asking to direct, how do you ask your questions in a way? And I'm finding like my personal experience is that sometimes, so for example, I manifested like a job in Vancouver, and I was praying and asking the universe to show me a sign that I would get the job. And I remember like finding 3 ladybugs, which was like confirmation from the universe, like in like this corporate building. Like there was like no way that ladybugs could get in, and yet I was in the washroom and like there was a ladybug on the door. It was really strange. But I think the day that I knew that I was going to get the job is I was running downtown Toronto, and as I turned to my left, there was like on the restaurant, there was like a restaurant on my left, and it was my boss's last name that was just like plastered on the restaurant. And just like really recently, last year, I was directed to do a mushroom ceremony, but I was very resistant to going into ceremony space. But I ended up kind of like facilitating a mushroom ceremony for my partner at the time in his, in his own place, in his apartment. And when he walked me home, when I got up to my apartment, there was a food delivery, and it was a mushroom soup delivery. And on the receipt, it was like my boss's name was on the receipt because I wanted to quit my job. And my ex was like, well, while he was on the mushrooms, he was like, just write a letter to your boss and tell her, like, dear Lisa, I'm going to quit. And then, like that manifested itself in my building. It was like the weirdest thing. And then that same night, when I got that mushroom delivery, I decided to take out the garbage. And in the garbage room, there was a helium balloon there with space cats on the balloon. And it said, "Happy birthday, Earthling." It was really interesting. And needless to say, I went to a mushroom ceremony after that. And it was really interesting. So I wanted to maybe like share that experience, because I don't know if anyone else experiences things like that, but it's quite profound when something, really starts to manifest itself like in such big intensity that you can't really deny it. And then I wanted to talk about like where it says like there's no evil and all of that stuff, from the lens of family constellations, which is where I kind of like hang out a bit. We do a lot of work with looking at victim perpetrator energies in the context of constellations in family systems and how the trauma gets carried down. And most often in the healing, we see that most often there's like a soul contract that was put into place between the victim and the perpetrator at a soul level. So obviously, like when someone is going through like with an experience where they are getting victimized in the 3D, you don't really want to tell them like there was a soul contract that happened. But based on what we've seen is like actually like from a soul perspective, we actually called in all of these, quote unquote, like negative experiences to redirect us on our path. So I just wanted to mention that. And I don't know if that's helpful, but I just wanted to share.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I love it. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was gonna say, I wanted to bounce on what you just said was there is not but good, there is no evil. There's not but life, but there is no death. And then I was thinking, well, if you said that, then why are you afraid of being in the jungle? Like, he just said about not turning around and not going back into the jungle, which I thought was interesting. And so coming from a shamanic perspective, the jungle is where all the for me, is where a lot of transformation happens. So, I'm not afraid of that jungle. It's kind of cool, actually. So, and I really love all the synchronicity that you're talking about, Steph. I love how the universe is speaking to you that way. It's beautiful. I yield. Oh, I'm complete. Whatever that comes first. Too many different groups.
Excuse me.
Oh, that's funny. Oh, wow. Oh, I thought
I think in the very first session of the raw contact, Rod gives the definition of the law of one and talks about how there is neither good nor evil, or good nor bad. There are no polarities. I mean, it's just so hard. Sometimes it's just so hard to like bring language to some of these concepts. And here, Walter Russell saying there is naught but good, there is no evil. Yeah. Which I mean, I think I can really connect with what he's saying. And it reminded me of the part where Ra talks about there is no good or evil, or good or bad. There is no polarity. And again, and that's from Ra's perspective in sixth density beyond, you know, when the polarities are merged. And that's where either there, I'm so curious to get into this with y'all, like where did Walter Russell go in his 39-day illumination? Like where, you know, where was he? Anyway, he's obviously very far beyond the veil, and he's, you know, getting these downloads, and now he's trying to come back into this veiled experience and communicate his experience. And so it's a tricky thing to do. I think we should keep moving through the material so we can see if we can finish these 2 chapters. I think let's skip the quotes from the Divine Iliad. I encourage you all to read them as you read through the book, but I think for the sake of time, let's skip those and get into chapter 2. I'll read the first part. Chapter 2, Creator and Creation. God, the Creator, is all there is, all that exists. God's creating universe of matter in motion appears to exist. To our senses, it sequentially disappears to reappear. It has no reality. It but simulates reality through the illusion of two-way projected lights in motion. God, the Creator, is the one being, the one person, the one mind, the one thinker, the one self, the one life, the one soul, the one power, the one reality. God's creation is the imaged patterned form of God's imagining, built in his image. It is the body of God, the record of his thinking, created by him for expressing the oneness of life, love, mind, soul, and power, which is in him alone. Does someone else want to read the next part, the one light?
I'll read. God is light. God is universal mind. Mind is light. Mind knows. Mind thinks what it knows. Mind thinks in 2 opposed lights simultaneously projected from their centering white light source and sequentially repeated in cycles. God's thinking and imagining are qualities of God's knowing. God's knowing mind is timeless and still. So also are God's thinking and imagining timeless and still. So likewise, man's thinking and imagining are as timeless and still as is his knowing. Stillness never can be motion or become motion, but it can appear to be. Motion merely seems, but stillness always is. The universal equilibrium can never be other than its own balance, but it can seem to be. The illusion, which is motion, springs from stillness and returns to stillness. This is a universe of rest. There is not but rest in the universe. Mind knows its one idea of creation as one whole. Mind thinks its one whole idea into seeming parts. Hence, the illusion of motion, which we call creation, and the illusion of substance, which we call matter. Matter, motion, time, change, dimension, and substance have no existence. The light of knowing mind alone exists. There is but one mind and one thinker. The one light of knowing mind is self of God. It is the universal self which centers all omnipresent self-creating bodies of God selves. This self-creating universe is the mind, imagined body of God, and record of God's thinking. We can know God. We cannot know his body, but we can see it. Likewise, we can know man. We cannot know the body of man, but we can see it. What God is, man is. God and man are one.
Thank you. I want to share something. I've had a number of experiences in my life where like I've gotten really intimate with and close with like knowing this stuff, like knowing the truth of this. And there's something in me that resists it. There's like a simultaneous, like, it's hard even to put into words, but like, it's so exciting. I think it's so exciting to like realize that there's like another side to our experience. There's like another side to our sensed experience of life. And yeah, when I read this, I get excited. Like it's like, it stimulates the part of me that like, where I've known it for myself. And I feel like there's almost like this magnetic pull. It's funny, it does. It feels like there's kind of like a magnetic pull in our culture into the jungle or something. Like there's like this belief, there's like this refusal to consider the other side of reality, like to consider the spiritual side of reality. I mean, there's plenty of people who are doing that. I'm not dismissing it, but there's such a focus on this, the sensed reality that I feel the magnetic pull to like, no, don't give it too much, I don't know, attention or something. But a part of me, a very, very deep part of me, like wants to give it all of my attention. Anyway, so when I read this like really powerful telling of what reality actually is, yeah, it just excites me. I just get really excited about it. Diana.
I appreciate that so much, Aaron. When I start to think about these concepts, I feel like I approach this state of like deep appreciation, like I'm touching upon this boundary where I can feel the roundness of this truth that can't be articulated into parts, into words. And then my mind just goes fractal, and it's like the biocomputer cannot keep up with what is happening, right? Like there's just, you can't process that. So it's beautiful and exciting, and there's this feeling state, right? There's still knowing, right? And I feel like that's something of what the author is talking about here, because he seems to be talking about, first he talks about God's knowing mind being timeless and still, right? And I can get my head around that. Like there's some people, I have a friend who describes this as the creator with the lights off versus the creator with the lights on, or the creator prior to the first distortion and the creator after the first distortion. So this idea that you have this unpolarized, unmoving thing that is without experience, but somehow is sentient, right? And this is the mind, I think, that Walter Russell is talking about, that knows, right? But what kind of got me was where he also then went on to say, so he said, God's knowing mind is timeless and still. Then he said, so also are God's thinking and imagining timeless and still. And I would have thought that as soon as you're in the realm of actual thinking and imagining, you are in the realm of distortion. You are in the realm of affinity. You're in the realm of separation into illusory parts so that there can be thoughts and, a thinker and thoughts and that which is being thought. And so, sorry, I'm trying to get to my point here, but he even goes on to say, so likewise, man's thinking and imagining are as timeless and still as is his knowing. Stillness can never be motion or become motion, but it can appear to be. And then later he says, mind knows its one idea of creation as one whole. Mind thinks its one whole idea into seeming parts. So it's almost like there's like states of mind of the creator. One is unpolarized, inactive, pure, undistorted, still, silent, and not having experience. And then there's this threshold, this quantum leap, whereby the creator suddenly is able to distort and make these poles, these sexes, these, this tension that gives rise to our experience and to all the other thoughts. And that just rings to me of the law of one and of the first distortion and of that boundary right there where you have the undistorted whole and then you have what it's capable of. And all I'm trying to say is that I'm just fascinated that Walter Russell puts thinking and imagining in the realm of stillness, silence, and non-experience. And then he also talks about how as soon as that starts, bam, division, tension, action, experience. So I think it's the same thing. I think it's the first distortion, said differently. But then there's that idea that man is a fractal of that, and that we have a knowing that doesn't cross into the boundary of active thought, but that actually like lives in us as the whole undistorted thing.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening. I know that was a lot.
I had the same tension with that part about that thinking and imagination are also in the realm of the stillness. I'm like, oh, and it actually does contradict. It sort of contradicts some other parts of the teaching. Something to watch for when you're reading is if he uses words to mean very different things. And the only way to catch it is if it's capitalized or not. So capital L light is an entirely different thing than lowercase l light. Capital M mind is a different thing than lowercase m mind. So you have to watch for that and just try to like pick up on that. And we can talk about, the distinction too. But it's confusing because light is used in a few different ways and they're very different concepts. So just something to be aware of. It's not unlike, Ra talking about intelligent infinity. There's two very different expressions of intelligent infinity. It's what Diana was just talking about. Like there's this sort of like God with the lights off and God with the lights on. And that's the two, the unmanifested intelligent infinity and the manifested, or the unpotentiated and the potentiated. Anyway. May?
And so catapulting off of that idea of the manifest and unmanifest. So that feels to me, because now my mind is all about, okay, let's figure out what is this thing about the light. And geez, I even forgot about what that was. But anyhow, it's like, okay, so and I love how you just described that, Diane, because it's like, okay, so is that the two different beams, the two different rays or whatever of light, the arcs? So the manifest and the stillness, right? The non-motion, then all of a sudden it springs into motion. And so that feels like really juicy. That's like, and it just happens because it just like kinetic motion or whatever. So now I'm just tracking less than like, what is this idea about the that's just cool. Thank you.
Kent?
I had to unmute. Yes, so I think one difference between the raw material and this material, I believe, is that the raw material was done through trans channeling, and this I'm guessing is conscious channeling. So Walter Russell's mental processes might also get involved in how he expresses himself. You see what I'm getting
Yep.
at?
Yep.
So therefore it might not be quite as crystal clear or aligned with the raw material as, you know, might not be perfectly aligned, but it's still trying to go to the same place.
That's right. That's an excellent point. I mean, yeah. So it's that thing of like, just watch for, there's distortions in this material for sure. There's things that are spoken here that are not the truth.
Right.
And so it's important not to like take it right in without being, thinking critically and feeling, also intuiting.
Right.
Rachel?
I'm definitely recognizing the distortions. But I also think that his flavor, his personal distortion and the flavor that he adds to the concepts he's bringing forth in their own way enhance the material. Because of the language that he's using and the way he writes, he really does have this poetic mind. And it adds to it, in my perspective, with the experience of my reading it so far, because there's something about his flavor that makes me kind of just want to run outside and look at the stars and just be and just exist. And it's also there, that polymath in him, without even knowing that he's a polymath. You can I feel it within me. Like, I feel like the way he writes inspires something within me to create and to do and to act and get my hands dirty and, and just experience. And so I think that there's something that about his flavor that makes it feel really hands-on to me. And having that, being able to compare it to the Law of One material helps me kind of find a balance and determine more the distortions. But all in all, I like the spice he adds to his vision of the universe.
Yeah. My take on him, I've read lots of his books. I've listened to some of his lectures, and I've listened to other people who have, studied him for a long time. And I really get the sense that he's incredibly sincere. Like, his heart is like purely seeking to serve and to teach and to like help people find the truth and find God. Yeah. So I trust his where he's coming from, and he does his best to try to like get this epic, download. He got this incredible like inner knowing, and then he's doing his best to try to translate it into English and to teach it to people. It's not an easy job. Yeah, he does a pretty good job. Just a few minutes left. Probably won't be able to read. Yeah, that's probably going to be it for the reading.
I feel like this next part, which I didn't read prior to the call, but I'm skimming now, gets into territory that is a little more compelling for me than so far. It's like getting juicier.
Yeah.
And so I wonder if will we make time for it next time, or are we going to stay on a strict calendar?
I'm hoping to stick to the syllabus.
Okay.
Yeah. And I'm hoping that, if we can, if whatever we didn't read during this session, if you haven't already read it, try to read it. And if you have any questions or want to discuss it, put it on the thread, the Telegram thread.
Well, I'm also curious if he goes, I imagine that he does go deeper into the territory of electricity or electromagnetism.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
So
Yes.
this is just like the intro to that topic, and we get to delve in
Mhm.
to future material. I'm
Correct.
also curious, does he talk about DNA at all?
Not that I can remember.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
Yeah. Well, the other thing I want to say, just for context for reading this, again, 1947, it was published, and he did write, he wrote a book before this that was more comprehensive. It's called The Universal One. But he sent that book to, I think he had like 200 copies printed, only 200 copies. And he sent them to all the preeminent thinkers and scientists all over the world. It wasn't meant for the mass consumption. And he never intended for it to be published. But then after he died, I think his wife published it because she thought that the world needed to see it. But you can see he went through a process of refining how he was able to articulate the concepts he was working with between the previous book and this one. So this one's better. It's more poetic, it's more clear, but it's not as comprehensive. And then he wrote the very last book he wrote is called A New Concept of the Universe. And once again, he's writing it to scientists. So it's a little bit more technical, but he changes how he talks about, like he has to like kind of invent language, sort of. Just like Ra invents language, intelligent energy, like intelligent infinity, these sorts of things. So he kind of has to invent language. Anyway, my point being, there's work that he did later in his life that doesn't actually comport with what he talks, a few things that he talks about in The Secret of Light. So anyway, it's tricky, but I still felt like this was the right thing for us to read because it feels like the most approachable and the most, given everything he wrote, I think it's the best synopsis, even though it's not the complete download. So just keep all that in mind. Nia?
Yeah, something about the language that is helpful for me to keep in mind. Any author is limited to the language that is expressed at that time, whatever year that was. For example, I used to do blacksmithing, and I went to read a book that was over 100 years old, and it was Old English, and that's not even spiritual in the sense at all, but it was still a hard read because it was very limited to how the words were spoken and how the sentences flowed at that time. So for me, a lot of my hangups so far, and I try to remember that it's just how it was phrased at the time, how language was used at that time. So similarly, I read, like I said before, Dion Fortune's stuff, and she was in the early 1920s as well. And sometimes my brain has a hang up around it because I'm like, oh, a lot of what she's talking about is societal issues that are relative at that time. And I'm always trying to translate it into the present, trying to in my mind almost reword it to how it might sound in flow for today. Like if you took that into the same and interjected it into today, and how much more evolved we are and how much more we understand, and how much, this author Walter is trying to come across completely new concepts, in a sense that the language has to almost be like catching. It almost has to want to pull you in for the understanding of it. So that maybe that the poetic aspect of that versus the technical in some of his other works is more for the masses to help kind of draw you into that, into the language there. And the other thing I wanted to say real quick was about the dark forces earlier. Not the dark forces, but the keep your eyes up, or if you look down in the darkness, you'll get sucked back into that. What resonated for me with that is he talked about being fearless. And so synchronicity this week has continued to route me towards being safe to be fearless, being and being safe to be courageous. But the word fearless keeps coming up, and it was something that showed up in a meditation for me, and I'm just it's all over. I can't ignore the synchronicity of the message for me that it's important for me to step up and be fearless for whatever reason. And I'm struggling with that. But what I got out of that was when you look down, when yes, there's a lot of focus on the light and to not shy away from shadow work, but the other portion of that is if we stop moving forward, it's almost like sinking. It's like if we don't keep moving forward, the human doubts start to show up. The 3D density kind of gets to us, the societal construction and cultural norms and all these things that we've worked so hard to break away from and to evolve from and evolve past and be past being towards that light. For me, if I stop and look down, I start to doubt again. I start to fall back into old patterning or old wiring. And I'm like, no, I have to keep looking up, because the second I look into that dark, it's not an evil or negative sense, but for me, that dark is just not moving forward and not evolving with the light. So that was my 2 cents worth.
Thank you. Okay, we have expired our time. It is 8:31. We are complete. Thank you all so much for being here and participating and reading and listening and sharing. It's really nice for me. I hope it is for you too.
Yeah, it's fun. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, y'all. Good night.
Good night.
Night.